Got a lot of people here this morning, so I think we're ready to get going. So we started the recording. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Check. I'm with the Maguire Agency. We are going to provide you an update on paid family medical leave in Minnesota. A lot of information on this law, but we will have more updates down the line. So with that, we'll get underway of the overview of the program. Quick disclaimer, we are at April 9th of 2025. This is the information that we are aware of today. You have probably, if you Google Google the law in Minnesota, there are thousands of different pieces that are a part of this law. So you can see that there are constant updates and constant news articles about it. So as we sit today, this is the information we know. There is speculation that is out on the internet. There is speculation from other carriers in the marketplace, but this is what we know as of today, and we will update you as we go along. So as we kick off the presentation here today, the big piece is to understand what the law is and what the law is not. Per the state of Minnesota, the goal of the law is to provide paid time off for employees to care for themselves or their family members with serious health conditions. So this breaks down into two different pieces: family leave and medical leave. You'll hear a little bit of the breakdown of this as we go on, but there's two different pieces of this policy. Many of the employers that are joining us today have different components of this already inside of your policies, whether that be paid time off, whether that be through a short-term disability plan. Mutual will talk a little bit about the impact of paid time off and different things with short-term disability today. But there are two different components of this. Some folks may have already seen people on the federal medical leave or the federal leave, which is unpaid. This law is intended to be paid leave for any employee in the state of Minnesota. So there are two different pieces there. And right now, as of today, the law start date is January 1st, 2026. Sarah, Jason, anything that you guys can add just to the overview, kind of the high level of the program?
I'll jump in here, Brian. So, there are the two different types of leave, the medical leave and the family leave. So, medical is for the employee's own serious health condition, but with family leave, it can be to care for a family member with a serious health condition, like, just like the employee, it's just a family member instead, but also for baby bonding. And so that could be for birth parents or non-birth parents within the first year following a child's birth or placement, if they're adoptive parents. There's also a military exigency and safe leave included in that family leave. So it's not limited to only caring for a family member with a serious health condition. There are several other types or other reasons that employees can take that family leave benefit.
Excellent, Sarah. Thank you for that input. We'll chat a little bit more about that as well as we go through the presentation. So who is required to participate in the law? All employers in the state of Minnesota that have employees. We'll dive a little bit deeper into that. Job protection is required, just like the federal leave. Employees can leave their position, and their position is guaranteed for them when they come back from leave, up to a certain circumstance. Employees will be required to go through an application process for leave if they have an upcoming surgery. As Sarah just mentioned, the bonding time, military leave, there will be a process both at the state level and if you choose to work with a private provider. Sarah, any piece to add here, especially along the job protection piece of it?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of chime in with the job protection. So this is more of a right to reinstatement. And so this is, for an employee, there cannot be any kind of retaliation against the employee for taking an approved leave. So with that piece, it does need to be either an equal or the same job if that, there's been a change in the employee's job. And this is also, the right to accrue any kind of PTO or any other types of benefits. So there cannot be any kind of negative impact to the employee having taken a leave.
Um, Someone just asked a question with regard to the application process. Will the employee be required to go through this process, or will the employer be required on the behalf of the employee?
That's a great question. So usually it is the employee that initiates the leave, but there are some situations where um, the employer could file and initiate the process on behalf of the employee, but usually it is the employee who is reaching out and initiating that process.
And then the next question is, will employees still be able to accrue PTO while on leave? That is a fantastic question. That is something that hasn't come up.
I'll say in other states, because the Minnesota rules are still in draft, but in most states, the state does leave that up to the employer's own internal policy. And so that's, kind of how the employer, since it is an employer provided benefit, the PTO, employers have a say over that type of policy rather than the state.
But now we talk a little bit about who is eligible for what employees are eligible for Minnesota paid family medical leave. Full-time and part-time employees covered by covered employers. As prior slides will show, we have in all employers are encouraged in this law or automatically in the law. Um, so as a breakdown between full-time and part-time, individuals who have earned at least 5.3%, this is where it gets confusing for me, state weekly wage, at state average weekly wage, excuse me, during the base period, which is 12 months, which is the 12 month prior to leave, which right now somebody would be eligible as we sit today for January 1st. So your base leave time frame, your measuring period would be January 1st, 2025 to January 31st or December 31st, 2025. If I look at that, it could be people making approximately $3,500 in a year that would be eligible for leave. Second piece here, employees who have worked for their employer for a minimum of 90 days. And then the last piece here, anybody that is a self-employed individual or independent contractor that chooses to participate and opts into the program. Sarah, back to you. This is where I would lean heavily on your expertise on the state weekly or the state average weekly wage and the breakdown of who is eligible for the leave.
Yeah, so I will just add, as far as the state average weekly wage, this is updated every October 1st. And so right now we have, the 2024 numbers, and we can kind of use that as a basis, going into the next year. And I believe it's a little over $1,300 a week is the current state average weekly wage, but that will be updated prior to the benefit program going live. And so we will have, a couple months time to adjust and to prepare and know exactly what we're looking at when the benefits go live in January. But again, it does go up every year, but not too much. So, you've got here the $3,500, somewhere between 35 and probably $4,000 is what they will have needed to earn in the year prior to leave. And I do want to point out with that minimum 90 days, that is for the job protection element. So there are cases where the employee, may be a new hire and not have been employed with the employee or with the current employer for 90 days, but they could still go out and receive the paid portion of the benefit.
Got it.
And there is a good question in the chat about that $3,500, and does it have to be earned at the current employer? And it's a great question. We get this all the time. The answer is no. So it's not current employer. This is transferable within the state of Minnesota. So I can't move to Minnesota in January and automatically, go out on leave. You have to have earned that within the state. But you could look at situations where someone might have a second employer. If they work two part-time jobs, it could be a combined earnings between those two, or if they're changing employment within the state.
Excellent. Excellent. I think there is also a question, hopefully this was answered. Is the process set up at the state, or are the employers required to implement the application process? Going to make an assumption here that that is for setting up the law. The employer will automatically be enrolled in the state plan. We'll talk about the timeline, but they're already recording wages. This is going to be based on wages, much like state unemployment is. So you saw something that you may have had to file in October of last year on those state wages. We'll talk a little bit about that. You're automatically enrolled. If you want a private plan, you're able. We'll talk a little bit about how that works. That would be more of an application process from there. Great questions. Overview on the leave program. So Sarah talked a little bit about the different components. So the first, the two pieces, one, bonding or family leave. I'm going to have Sarah further define this. The second is 12 weeks of medical leave, or a combined 20 weeks of both medical and family leave. So there is a cap on this. There is a cap on the amount that an employee can take with job protection. The medical leave, very straightforward. I have a surgery. I'm going to go have a surgery, and I'm going to be out for 5 weeks. I would be able to I'd be able to take that and get that paid leave. And we're going to show you in the next slide what that weekly average wage is, and what employees would be paid out based upon salary ranges. Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit more? Because you did a fantastic job of talking about the bonding leave again. And once again, having it defined, which I think, personally of working in this for about almost the last year. And this is my understanding, our team's understanding of the law of where we sit, working with our preferred carriers like you to understand the law, sitting even on some state webinars as well. I think this is where I'm challenged. Our team is challenged on the bonding, understanding that it's not as straightforward as a medical. Can you kind of give us a little bit more overview on the bonding piece of it?
So yeah, so bonding leave would apply to any family who's welcoming a new child. And again, I said it could be the birth parent or non-birth parent. So we do see a lot of, fathers or, other partners going out on bonding leave. And it can also be for adoption or foster care placement. There is that I guess parameter where it has to be taken within the first year. And so this is something to kind of keep in mind when the program goes live in January of 2026. There could be an employee who had a baby in 2025 and they're still within that first year and eligible for bonding when the benefits go live. We have seen that happen in other states. There is, so if I had a baby, say January 15th of 2025, I wouldn't get a full 12 weeks. I could only take it from January 1st to January 14th, because that is, up to the child's first birthday. So, and it doesn't all have to be taken at once. I could split up my time if I wanted to take 6 weeks, and then take another 6 weeks a few months later. So that's just kind of how the bonding leave works. And again, foster care placement or adoption would count towards this as well.
Excellent.
Brian, any other questions or any clarification
Yeah, not so we have
on
a
that?
few different
Yeah.
pieces that are coming in here. One is that 20 weeks per year. So it would be, I mean, the way that I understand it, January 1st to December 31st, 2026 is the cap on the 20 weeks.
So yes, it is not per claim, it is per year. That's a great question too. I know with a lot of existing, say, short-term disability policies, you would get a new fresh bucket if you had a different claim for a different reason. The states, and that also applies to the 12 weeks. So, if I had multiple babies in a year, I could not, take uh 20 weeks of bonding. I would only be able to take 12 total. And I did want to say, you mentioned the calendar year, January to December. Minnesota actually has, if you go with a private plan, they can use, or an employer can choose any calculation method like FMLA that they want. So it could be, usually what we're looking at is from the employee's start date of leave. So if I go on leave today, April 9th, then that starts my year and I will, it'll run the next 52 weeks up until April 8th of 2026, if that makes sense, or
Yep.
2026, 2027 when the benefits are live. But employers, if they wanted to set it up like a calendar year and they're going with a private plan, that could be an option.
Um, I have our pets included as family.
No, that is a good question. There are, and actually, Jason and I have talked about this a couple times together, because there is a very broad definition of, family member. It's not just parent, child, and spouse like what we see with FMLA. There's also, grandparents, grandchildren, and any individual that has an expectation of care. But there does have to be a human element there.
Yeah, yo. Awesome, awesome. Are there state resources for small companies who have multiple people that go out at a time who need to hire somebody with temporary to cover the workload? Um, I I think that's a fantastic question. I know the state has a lot of different resources that are a part of this. I am not sure that they have the correct resources um, for the workload. I don't know, Sarah, from your understanding, do you know of any resources for people helping with the temporary workload that of someone being on leave?
Sometimes the states will put out like a small employer. So this would only be very small employers, kind of an assistance type program. Um, all of this is still in draft, and so we do not have a lot of details about that right now and how that would work.
The next is NAFA. I think it's probably NAFA or NABIP. Still working to get exceptions for small companies. That is a great question. That's going to probably tee up. We'll answer that in a second, but to really answer that is right now there is something sitting on the legislative floor to push this back until 2027. There are also resources for groups that are under 30 for a grant program as my understanding for any employers that are under a certain threshold of, I want to say it's 30 employees. Sarah, do you have any more kind of piece on that of as far as the grant programs for employers for the law?
So unfortunately, it's not really an exception where they would be exempt from the law, if that's what the question is asking. But there are some premium or contribution breaks for smaller employers under 30 lives. And there also has to be, there's a component with that too. The whole group's earnings have to be under a certain amount too. So if you're a small employer but very high earning employees, that might not apply. And this is under the state plan specifically, but you can get a 75% rate instead of that full 0.88. So it would be about 0.66 in those cases for the smaller employers. They can get a reduced rate if they qualify for that.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question is, how does this apply to remote employees that are outside of the state of Minnesota? Very straightforward. This is a state law. This is for anybody that is working in the state of Minnesota. If you have employers that are outside of the state, if they have their own leave, with that, you would have to comply with those pieces as well. Correct?
Yes.
Yep. Right.
Yeah,
Um,
and it is work state. I do
yeah,
want to say that. So I'm assuming remote workers are, working in
working.
that state. I do want to also say that because, if you have someone who lives in Wisconsin but travels, and works at a Minnesota location, then they would be covered. And vice versa, if you have a Minnesota resident but they don't actually work in the state and they cross state lines to work at a location elsewhere, that doesn't apply.
Okay. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the
Yeah.
clarification. I know some of that is how some of the guidelines are getting rolled out too as the law rolls out. Um, I do have a question on the PFML. How does it interact with short-term disability policy? I think that's perfect for the next slide. We'll answer that question. So as we know today, once again, trying to put out that disclaimer of this is what we know today, based on all of our expertise and research. Um, Here's what we know as far as the reimbursement on the program of the what it looks like from an annual wage, what it looks like from a weekly wage standpoint, and the replacement. Um, so as you can see, if your employees are making on the low end of about $40,000, there's an 87% wage income replacement. Um, and then as we go, anybody that is over $100,000 or $120,000, there is a cap of 1481 a week, or almost 1482 a week, that an employee would be able to get replacement for wages. But that is the cap. As we sit today, Sarah mentioned they will be updating any different wage programs, or they'll be releasing that dependent upon the Social Security wage cap. So that's where we sit today. So, Sarah, anything else to add on this? Or I think, this are, you kind of tease up perfectly for us talking about why to use an outside carrier or a private plan, and then how it interacts with short-term disability if somebody has a short-term disability plan today.
Absolutely. So, just a couple clarifications here with the benefit calc and what an employee can earn, or receive while out on leave. That is going to be maxed at the state average weekly wage. So, it is a little bit different. And so, whatever the state average weekly wage will be as of October 1st of this year, that will be the maximum benefit amount going in to 2026. And that is updated every year. As far as the contributions in the Social Security wage cap, this is a question I get a lot. And once that employee has hit that amount, if you have high income earners and they've hit that, it's 176, 100 right now, and that will, of course, increase for next year as well. That applies to both the employee and employer contribution. So it's nothing, neither portion is due. I get asked that a lot. It's not just the employee portion, it's the employee, or so, yeah, it's the employer. Since it's a 50-50 split, the employer no longer has to contribute either for that employee.
Got it. Excellent.
And
Um,
then I
Go
can
ahead.
talk a little bit about the short-term disability.
Yes.
Yeah, so with that, they can run concurrently if it's for the employee's serious health condition and they are qualifying under a short-term plan. Most short-term disability policies, I know all our fully insured policies at Mutual of Omaha have some sort of offset language in there where it would say that the short-term disability will be reduced by any amount, kind of dollar for dollar offset that they're receiving under a state plan. And so, you can kind of see here on this chart, the $40,000 a year worker receiving 87% income replacement. That's more than most short-term disability policies pay. So they may not receive anything additional through short-term disability. But, as you receive higher income and lower, wage replacement, that's where short-term disability could kind of come into play and still pay additional funds on top of the PFML. But the PFML is going to be the primary payer.
Got it. Excellent.
And along those lines, sorry, Brian, I keep
No, no,
not
keep
trying
going.
to
Yeah.
take over too much, but the
No,
next question was really good in clarifying what I said about the calendar year and starting a leave. And does it mean you would have to wait from that date to start another leave? Not necessarily. It's just that year is when you would replenish your time and your 12 weeks or 20 weeks total. And so it doesn't have to be 12 weeks. It could be 2 6-week leaves. So it's up to that maximum. And especially with this employee serious health condition, they may not need all 12 weeks if, it's a gallbladder surgery. I'm just going to use as an
Yeah.
example. Those are usually about 2 weeks, recovery that we see from a claims perspective. And so they may only use those 2 weeks and they have 10 weeks still available, which they may not use. Employees may not have that, but if they also had a baby, they could take, additional time up to that year, and then they would have another full bank of leave available. I hope that clarifies.
Yep. Um, there was a question on for smaller employers would owner wage be included in the earnings threshold? So I think there is the part of the breakdown of the payment of wages. So trying to think of this if of the state rate is 0.88 on a payroll tax, which would be split up between the employer and the employee. Um, for an owner specifically, if an owner is paying themselves on a W-2, I'm assuming I don't know as far as the law piece, the law provision of the tax is going to be collected what they're paying themselves through payroll, correct? So if they're paying themselves $30,000 a year and they're going to try to qualify for wages, they're going to be based on that smaller piece, not if they're paying themselves through a K-1, for example, or a dividend. Correct?
Exactly. It really kind of depends on how that is structured. Usually, when we talk about owners, the definition of an employee is someone who is not necessarily free from control. So, if you have an owner who is free from control and not really managed by anybody at the company, they would not necessarily be considered an employee, especially like you said, Brian, the K-1 earnings. This is where I use my favorite phrase of talk to your employment attorney if there's any kind
Yeah.
of
Yep.
questions,
Yep.
because there are a lot of nuances, and this is such a loaded question because it can really depend on the business's structure and how that's set up.
Yep. So once again, no one, which kind of segues in perfectly. We will be having another event once the law is complete with a labor attorney. So you can come out and seek some free advice. Um, but great segue here. I know there's a few different questions on the benefits and rolling out a private plan, and I think part of it too will be the difference of using a private provider versus using the state plan. This is something that our team is ramping up for of trying to give our clients the best sound advice. And we've got clients that are small businesses up to very large entities and trying to do the breakdown of what is going to work best for them. So I want to kind of pass this over to you and Jason of the benefits of using a private provider. At Maguire, we're going to help you take a look at each one of them to make sure that we're providing the best sound advice for you.
All right, I'll kick it off. And Jason, if there's anything you want to add, please feel free to speak up. Obviously, at Mutual of Omaha, we're a little bit biased towards private plans, but that doesn't mean it's the best fit for all employers. We do understand that there are a lot of costs, considerations associated with the benefits, and that's definitely going to be a primary factor that people are considering when they're looking at the private versus state plan. But one of the big benefits is having multiple coverages handled under one entity. So, we talked about the short-term disability and the coordination with PFML. And, and think about it from the employee perspective and only having to file once with one entity. So that is something, and from an employer perspective, being able to do billing, and the contributions through one entity and having one portal to go through to see all your leave statuses together. It's a little bit easier and a little bit more streamlined, when you have everything with one carrier instead of having to go through the state for one, benefit and then a private carrier for another. I will say, Minnesota's not live, so we don't know exactly what that claim process will look like yet or claim time to payment. But other states do tend to have a little bit of a delay, especially when the benefits are new because the volumes are just enormous there. When the program opens up, we see a lot of claims being filed right away. And so, from a carrier perspective, I know at Mutual of Omaha, our standard is 4 business days as a maximum. And we really push our teams to be on day one, for processing, especially new leaves, because we know those employees are, out and they need contact and need to understand the process. So we're trying to contact them, within 4 business days max. And I did hear on a recent webinar the state saying they're looking at about 14 days for claim payment. We kind of talked about the one-stop shop and having everything together and, not having to go through multiple, partners to try to coordinate benefits, but also, having dedicated resources. So at Mutual of Omaha, we have dedicated claim consultants for every size employer. It's not for only over a certain size. We have dedicated resources, and that's a name and a person and a direct line, that you're able to work with. And same with our claims specialists. There's one claim specialist assigned to that employee's leave, and they will be working directly. Our um, claims handlers' names and direct extensions are on all our communication. So they have their emails, they have their, direct lines if they need to get in touch with someone. Whereas, what we see with most states, it's a 1-800 number and you're getting a different person every time, or it's a generic email address. And I will say, having worked with some of the states, it does take a little bit longer to get a response.
Yep, I know that as we've been working with not only Mutual, but some of our other carrier partners, I know that Oregon was recently rolled out. Massachusetts was within the last couple of years, and I know that some of their wait times have been up to a month
Mhm.
for processing. And I think what we haven't heard a ton of guidance on with the state of Minnesota is the staffing for claims and leave. And we'll talk a little bit about the rollout of the process as it sits today with the law. But that's one thing, that's one question mark that I think all of us have on our mind is how is it going to be administered at the state, where partners like Mutual of Omaha have been in the leave business for a very long time. And I know there are a few employers that we have on the call here today that have been working with Mutual for a number of years. And we've always gotten really good feedback on any the long-term, short-term disability that's been processed, or if anybody has the federal leave, as you guys have helped them out with that. So, um, anything else to add on the benefits of using a private plan?
Jason, I'm not sure if you have anything. You,
Um, Sarah, I think you did an excellent job of just outlining, our claims process and, timeline, what that's going to look like. I think the one important thing that I think, again, we might be a little biased in this regard, but I think we do a great job of proactive outreach. That's something you're going to get with a Mutual of Omaha or a private insurance carrier. Going into the state of Minnesota or Oregon or Colorado, it's kind of that 1-800 number. So oftentimes we're usually missing documents or looking for physician notes, and just having that proactive outreach, I think, is super helpful. And then again, just from an overall rating standpoint, we know that the state rate in Minnesota is going to be that 0.88%, that payroll tax. And from a Mutual Omaha standpoint, we're going to look at each group separately and individually, and we're going to rate that based on the merits of each group. So looking at demographics, industry, if you're a current Mutual Omaha customer, we'll obviously take that into consideration. But which means some groups unfortunately might not be a fit, and other groups might be an excellent fit. So kind of looking at those, group by group and customer by customer.
and
Excellent.
Jason, there's a
Yeah.
really good question in the chat about the contributions being the same with a private plan. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that.
I mean, the contributions, again, in a perfect world, we're able to be, less less than 0.88. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but in a perfect world, we're either at the state rate or below. Contribution wise, the employer, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but the employer would be able to, take care of all of the contribution. Generally speaking, that's going to be a 50-50 split.
Yeah.
So, I mean, kind of back to what we're seeing in the marketplace, because these are already coming out for a lot of our in-force business amongst any of our carriers that are writing it. Not all of them. I want to say we will still have to ask of what that looks like. Dependent upon the size of the group, the demographics, just like many other pieces of your short-term disability, if you have it today, are going to be based on the likelihood of somebody taking leave. What we found is that for the most part, the plans are coming at the state rate or below. A few cases we've seen it come a little bit above the state rate. So I do want to address that if we do see somebody that comes in at the state rate, the minimum that can be split is 50%. So right now the tax, if you're automatically enrolled in the state, is 0.88. The most an employee can do is 0.44. So two examples that will come up. The first example would be if somebody comes underneath that state rate. Could that employee still pay that 0.44? And the answer that we've been guided on is yes. You can't charge that employee any more than half that rate, which is 0.44. If the private plan comes higher because they anticipate that you will have a higher propensity of leave, and that rate comes in at just say 1.0. The most that you can charge your employees is 0.44. So that's the guidelines. But some of our employers have felt that it's better to go with a private plan just based on the overall employee experience. So a timeline of the law of where we sit today. As you can see, we're at April 9th today. Back in October, you were to have submitted a wage and tax detail report to the state of Minnesota. This kind of coincides with what you're probably seeing on your quarterly wage and tax for state unemployment. A few important dates that are coming up. In preparation for these meetings, I always make sure that I'm up to date on everything that is happening at the state level. There is a law right now that is to push the law back a year. We will know that finalized May 19th is when we should have that further clarification. We will start if everything goes into place right now. Our team is prepping that we will have everything going into place for January 1 and start doing the analysis starting in June for our employers to see what is going to be the best for them. Along with that, you are going to see after this webinar, we will send out the materials from today. We will have a labor law seminar that will be in Roseville here on the 18th, and we have a labor law attorney that will be breaking down any of the law changes moving forward, and we will have some final guidance on the law should it go into place. July 1st, you can start to opt out of the state plan should you choose to go with a private plan. By November 1st, you must provide notice if you are not opting into the state plan. Once again, as a company in the state of Minnesota, you're automatically enrolled in the state plan. And our goal is for any of our clients to make sure that we have all that information to the state by October to make sure that there isn't any double payment or anything that you're automatically enrolled in. Because I know that there will be some things that can and will get quite messy. January 1st, magical date. Right after New Year's Eve, we will go into the state of Minnesota. We'll have paid family medical leave at this point. And one piece that you will see is your first quarterly payment will be due on April 1st, which will act such like a state unemployment tax. That is when all the state payments will be due. However, the law, unlike other states, we will not have a run-in. So you will not be paying before the law starts, but your employees could take leave starting January 1st. That is what the timeline that we know it today. We will have further communication. And once again, everybody on this webinar will get a link for our labor law seminar when we have everything that is finalized, and we'll be able to have some final guidance. And if you are a Maguire client, we will start working with you in June to look at different options, whether that be a private plan or the state plan for your business. I know we do have some questions. As I kind of scroll back to where we left off, I want to kick it back to Jason and Sarah to see if there's anything that I've missed on our timeline or anything that we can, anything that you'd like to add.
I'll just comment that we don't know exactly the process with the state. And so these are great timelines, Brian, but like the state has not given us the actual, here's what it looks like. Here's what, how you do it. Here's what we require yet. I'm getting those questions a lot. Most states require either a copy of the private plan policy document, which Mutual of Omaha would be able to provide, to our clients if going, through a Mutual of Omaha private plan, or even a confirmation of insurance form. Sometimes they don't need the full document. They just need a cover page or a form that says we're going with the private plan. Here's our carrier. So just more details to come on that. Right now, we're really at the mercy of the state to provide all that information to us.
Yep. And we should have that final guidance by the time the law is in place.
Oh, yes. So
Fingers
soon.
crossed.
Yeah,
Yep,
soon.
soon.
They
Yep.
said spring 2025 is when we should, start opening that door and get some
Yeah.
of that final guidance. So any day now, I check the website, I think every day, so
Yep.
to see if there's
Yep.
an update.
So now I want to make sure that we get to all the questions. We've got
Sure.
about, roughly about 10 minutes before the end here. I have a question that came in. What if they live in Wisconsin but work in Minnesota? Would this law, could somebody take leave? If my home is in Hudson, but I work in Woodbury, what does that look like for me?
It's all based off work state.
Okay.
And the easy answer for that is where would the employee be designated for unemployment purposes?
Okay.
If they would be filing unemployment with the state of Minnesota, they would be filing for PFML and
Okay.
eligible.
Perfect. So very easy answer there. If I'm collecting unemployment in Wisconsin, I'm not eligible for Minnesota. Next question, are the numbers that we had presented, are these gross wages? So these would be a payroll tax. So they're based, so would leave, I think the way that I'm understanding the question is, would leave be taxed? Would I be taxed on it, or would this be a post-tax benefit, as most times we instruct to pay short-term disability post-tax versus a pre-tax, so that you would not be taxed on your benefit? Is that how would these, if I'm on leave in the state of Minnesota, how would I, if I'm receiving a $1,500 a week check on leave, are those taxed or are those untaxed?
I want to say tax guidance is very difficult. And sometimes it depends on the type of leave. And so with family leave, typically not subject to FICA taxes. But most of the time the benefits will be subject to the federal income tax, whatever the employee receives. I would also say that the employee deduction should be a post-tax deduction. And so if we're looking at a medical leave and we're taxing that benefit, we would be probably taxing only 50% if it's, matching the state rate on our private plan, because the employee's paying 50% post-tax. And I do want to say, like, if we're looking at the calculation and what would be due, for that 0.88%, the state does look at gross wages to determine, the amount due.
I think we answered one of this. Is this a fully employer-sponsored program or employees contributing? Employers can choose to sponsor this program solely. However, most of our clients are going to have that piece be charged to the employee as well. You certainly, as the employer, can be a great employer and cover 100% of this program. Next question is, what will the communication look like between the state and employer when approving a leave for the employee? I think, Sarah, you kind of hit on that a little bit of to be determined. I think, what I've understood is there's a lot of things that are unclear between the state and the employer for that communication on a few different fronts, but anything to kind of know or draw off your experience of what that communication looks like in between, employers in other states for those leave programs.
It varies, yeah, in other states. And so, yeah, a lot to be determined. I know the state of Washington wouldn't tell employers hardly anything until recently. They have kind of, I guess, given in and started sending some communications, but usually there is some kind of notice of approval. It's just the amount of details. Some states won't even put the benefit amount, to the employer, which makes it difficult if you're trying to top up with their PTO to make them whole.
Yep.
So just some things to consider. But yeah, to be determined for Minnesota right now.
I think we've kind of answered this one. Does the employer pay out FML, or do they receive payments from the state? They would receive payments from the state if you're opting into the plan. The employee would actually get if you're automatically opted into the plan, you are approved through the state, you get a check from the state. And that would be the same for if you work with, for say, Mutual of Omaha, you're going to get a check from Mutual of Omaha. Okay. Question on an individual employer that has somebody in another state. So you have an owner working in Minnesota. All employees are remote. Does the company still required for the payments on the insurance plan? So owner in the state, everybody else is outstate. So they're paying state unemployment tax in those other states. Would that employer automatically be enrolled in the state plan? Kind of an interesting question. We can probably take that offline if it's not an easy answer.
I'd say again, depends on the structure of the company and whether or not the the owner is considered an employee. And really, if the other employees of the company are in other states, it would only be the owner covered if they, again, are an employee. But if they're free from control and maybe a K1 owner, then probably not going to apply.
Excellent. Somebody currently has a short-term disability policy that covers up to 66%. The state would pay all of the wage replacement. Is that correct? Quick answer from myself. I might defer back to Sarah. Depends upon the wages that are made, and then your short-term disability typically has a weekly cap. So that's where that would lie in. So once again, good to have an analysis. If you do have a short-term disability plan today, to look at that, how those rates will change and income replacement based on each one of them. Anything else to add there?
Nope, that's exactly it.
Next one on public employers, schools. Can they use a private provider, or do they have to use the state plan? My understanding is if you are a public employer, you can still use the private plans through a company like Mutual or other carriers. I think an interesting one, I don't know if we can answer this very easily. If we go with a private, who is liable if the claims are filed incorrectly? That would probably fall back on the employee if they're not following the proper guidance. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've answered that one. Here's a great question that I know we did not answer in the presentation. When do employees have to be notified about the law? What is the process for that? I know as we've chatted with, we don't have the true timeline. I know there's certain things on that, but when do employees, Sarah, have to be notified that this law is going into effect? As we sit here today, if it goes into effect on January 1st.
So that would be by December 1st of this year. It's usually a 30-day notice requirement, which I know December has 31 days, but I'm just going to use
Yeah.
the clean start of the
Yep.
month. You usually need to do that because they're going to see the payroll deductions. And I will say states put out really good, like poster notices that you can use as the model. And then I know that we use that and do a Mutual of Omaha one with our contact information for filing claims as well. So there should be a poster notice provided by the state.
Excellent. Um, and then I think the last question, once again, on the rates for the payroll tax, can we break that down just a little bit and probably just give a little bit kind of clear, succinct of the rates today with the state are 0.88 for a payroll tax. Anything kind of add there for the payroll tax?
And it's 0.88%. So I guess when we're looking at the calculations,
Yep.
if you're
Yep.
doing the multiplication, you got to move that decimal over because I do see that question in the chat. So it is the
Yep.
0.88% of the employee's gross wages.
Excellent. I think that we are all out of questions, which is you guys have been fantastic. I think this law has spurred a lot of questions on a lot of different fronts. I know that you've more than likely been invited here today from our marketing department, our benefits department, somebody here working at Maguire. If you have follow-up questions, please reach out to anybody that may have invited you, and we'll make sure to answer any of those questions. I do want to put in a plug for us, and you will all be receiving an information on our labor law updates on July 18th. We will plan to be together for that as there will be a lot of information to cover. This one will more than likely be the star of the show. We've had a few labor law updates, and there's a lot of questions about this. And we should have further clarifications. So with that, I will make sure that everybody that has joined or registered for the webinar today gets this. I want to thank Sarah and Jason from Mutual of Omaha for being fantastic partners in this process. And we appreciate you joining us today and giving us your insight and drawing off your experience. So we really appreciate everybody that joined today. Special thank you to everybody. Once again, Sarah, Jason, thank you. Look forward to seeing all of you very soon.
Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Bye now.